was a dark and stormy night in a small village somewhere in Asia. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain pounded against the windows of an old, decrepit house on the edge of town. The villagers whispered about the strange happenings that had been occurring in the house, where a family had lived for generations. The youngest daughter of the family, May, had always been fascinated by stories of the supernatural. She would spend hours reading books about ghosts and demons, and loved to scare her siblings with tales of monsters that lurked in the shadows. But nothing could have prepared her for the terrifying entity that had taken up residence in her own home. It started with small things. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in strange places. The family would hear footsteps in the middle of the night, even though they were all tucked away in their beds. May would wake up to find her room in disarray, as if someone had been rummaging through her belongings. But as the days passed, the entity grew bolder. It began to manifest itself in more sinister ways. Shadows would flicker in the corners of rooms, and a cold chill would creep through the house, even on the warmest of days. The family began to feel a sense of dread that hung heavy in the air, a presence that seemed to watch their every move. May was the first to see it, a dark figure that hovered in the corner of her room, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat as the entity moved closer, its form twisting and contorting in the darkness. Terrified, May fled from her room and sought out her family, frantic with fear. They gathered in the living room, huddled together as the entity prowled the halls, its eerie presence filling the house with a sense of foreboding. As the night wore on, the entity grew more aggressive. It began to whisper in the family's ears, its voice a chilling susurrus that filled their minds with thoughts of despair and destruction. Doors slammed shut of their own accord, and the walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy that made the family's hair stand on end. Desperate for help, May reached out to a local shaman, hoping that he could rid their home of the malevolent entity that haunted them. The shaman arrived at the house, his robes billowing in the wind as he approached the door. He sensed the dark presence within immediately, and his face grew grave as he prepared to perform a cleansing ritual. The family watched as the shaman chanted ancient incantations, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. Smoke curled from burning herbs, filling the air with a pungent aroma that made May's head swim. And then, as the last words of the ritual left the shaman's lips, the entity let out a primal scream that shook the house to its foundations. But the shaman was undaunted. Taking up a sacred talisman, he strode boldly into the heart of the darkness, his eyes ablaze with a fierce determination. And then, with a final, mighty shout, he banished the entity from the house, casting it back into the shadows from whence it came. With a collective sigh of relief, the family watched as the darkness lifted, leaving the house bathed in a warm, golden light. The shaman smiled at them, his face lined with age, but his eyes shining with a wisdom that seemed to reach beyond the mortal realm. And as the sun rose on a new day, May and her family knew that they had faced a terrifying entity and emerged victorious. But they also knew that they would never forget the horror of that night and the chilling presence that had once haunted their home.